Hey everybody, my name is Richard, and what I wanted to do today is talk a little bit about Empyrean Investigations. I'm the author of this book, and what it is a series of rules for players to play detectives in Dungeons and Dragons, and for DMs to have 3 cases filled with codes and clues and ciphers and puzzles that will really challenge your players and test out their skills of deduction. Um, I'm hopeful that what I can do today is talk a little bit about how to master the investigative adventure, because it's a little bit different than a traditional adventure, and it takes a few different skills and pulls things in a different way. And to give you just kind of the instant overview, the very top of this whole thing, where we're going to go, an investigative adventure, right? If you think about a Sherlock Holmes novels, it's about learning information over time. Those stories aren't typically action based or full of combat or anything like that, although a D&D investigation certainly can be. But it's got this real focus on exploration, and it has the potential for players to fail. Sherlock Holmes sometimes goes somewhere and doesn't learn a thing, or at least Watson doesn't learn a thing there. And this failure and this impetus to move on is what makes our explorations really gripping and gets us into reading those stories. It's very difficult to transfer those to D&D, where generally success is not guaranteed, but kind of guaranteed. And in terms of investigations and skill checks, well, we'll see. It's a little more expected than you might think. So what I want to do is talk about a few of these little things. I've got this broken up into a few parts to kind of break down investigations. And the first thing I want to do is just kind of a review of the 3 pillars of adventure design. These are baked into the core of Dungeons and Dragons, and the 3 are combat, as you may expect, role-playing, and exploration. And of the 3, exploration is the toughest one. Combat, the book is full of rules about combat. Your character has so many options, so many choices, so many ways to bring combats forward, make them very interesting and intricate. Role-playing, I mean, we're all very social creatures, so we talk a whole lot. We're ready for that, right? And the book has a few ideas about how to develop role-playing, but that is something that just comes from the social network of the game. But exploration is a little bit tricky. There's a chapter on exploration, and what it talks mostly about are travel, like how long does it take to get you here? How fast can you swim? Things like that. Lighting, right? These kind of ideas that are good, they're important for watching your character explore, but in a lot of ways, they have to do with your character interacting with the environment you find yourself in. In a lot of D&D games, that is the exploration, right? It's like, ooh, I'm in a forest. What's a forest like? How do I get through here? Ooh. And you're discovering things, right? That discovery is really, really exciting. It's not so much about investigation. And while those skills have always been in the game, we've had our in third ed, like our listen, spot, and search, all broken down so that you could only be good at one of those. Or, if you were only good at one of those, it really limited how you could interact with a scene. Meanwhile, we have, in the modern game, in 5th ed, we have the investigation skill. What if you fail that skill check? Right? What happens when you fail these things? Do you just lose? Can you never do it again? D&D is a really, really intriguing game for that reason. And I want to before I jump into failure, because you'll see that's where is it? It's over there, part 2. I want to talk a little bit about why investigation should feel a little bit more like combat, right? Combat is this intense part of the game where we all have actions, we all have turns, we all have things we can contribute to a singular challenge. And often when we look at investigations, when we think about puzzles, right? We think about clues, we think about ciphers, we think about these things that if you don't get them, you fail, period. And there's no way to get through that block. And it's really, really tricky. In a combat, on the other hand, the fighter has a thing they can do. They can go fight, but maybe that's not what we're going to do. Maybe we're going to do magic spell combat, and we're going to blast this person into oblivion. Maybe we're going to use the environment to our advantage. We're going to knock them off into the ocean or something, and their fire spells don't work. I don't know. We have so many ways to complete a combat, and a puzzle's just not the same thing. An investigation, a riddle, doesn't seem like the same thing. And when they are most successful, they are. So how do we do that? How do we generate these many paths to success for our players in an investigation? That is, number one, one of the things that you as a game master need to sort out if you're going to run an investigation, because players do fail sometimes, and that can't just be the end of the story, right? Take Sherlock Holmes, take Scooby-Doo, right? Scooby-Doo's great. They're wandering through this case trying to discover what's going on. They don't know where they're supposed to go in the end, right? A lot of our dungeons, a lot of our, exploration style things, you're going to get to the end, the monster at the end, or maybe you're just going to be surprised by the monster at the end, but you kind of have a path. In an investigation, you may not have a path, and you have to discover it. You have to figure out where it's going over time. So I need those paths, and that is a tricky thing to sort out. You'll see the Scooby-Doo team split up often, right? So one team will go investigate here, part B will investigate over here, they'll come back, they'll collaborate, they'll put their sources together and kind of figure out where they want to go next. And sometimes that is good, and sometimes that is bad. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to failure. But I want you to imagine this. I want you to really quickly imagine a puzzle like we are used to seeing in D&D games for the most part. Say you've got a Sphinx, right? Sphinx, classic riddles. Classic teller of riddles. And your party approaches this Sphinx and you're like, uh-oh, I know it's going to be a riddle challenge. All right, let's get our brains out. Let's get ready to puzzle it up. And the Sphinx looks at you and says, "What's my favorite number? Tell me or die." What? I don't know, maybe that has been enough to hint you that there's some secret number. Maybe in your home campaign, like the god of death has a favorite number or something like that. But for the most part, that's a pretty ridiculous, that's not a riddle, even though it's a question with an answer, but it's a puzzle that has no solution, and it's just frustrating immediately because our players have no way to solve the puzzle, right? That's ridiculous, but imagine this. If the Sphinx instead said, "Welcome to my vault of wonders. Explore, and then tell me what's my favorite number, or die." Suddenly our players have something to really grab onto. They know that there is this vault, right, of wonders. And maybe if they explore it, they will come up with this answer. Maybe they're going around and they're counting all the gold coins and it adds up to a certain number, and then they find a history book and it's got the exact same number as like the date that's important, or it's been bookmarked or something, right? These are ways that we can investigate and solve these problems. This puzzle is a bad puzzle if what it comes down to is I roll a nature check to see if I know Sphinx's favorite numbers, and oh, I get it, cool, done. That's bad. As a person who designs puzzles, that's really, really important. Giving people the context to be successful, not only to be successful, but to know that there is a puzzle and to know how to approach it at the start, right? This is really about kind of giving players expectations and allowing them to manage, live within those expectations. If we're not giving players these kind of boundaries, then they're not going to be able to crack into these and be successful. All right, we've been a little bit vague about these for the most part, although they are very important. I want to dig into a couple ideas that I wrote into Empyrean Investigations on purpose, because this is hard. Giving people expectations is difficult. And one of the classic ways that I found to give players a little bit more agency in terms of an investigation is to deal with the divination spells that we all know and love. Excuse me. They all come from the low-level characters, right? Higher-level characters get these spells that are a little bonkers, and I wanted to play around with these lower-level spells and come up with a way to give players more expectations about what they will get when they cast them. So these are a few different spells. Speak with plants, speak with animals, and speak with dead. I love all three of them. They seem like they should tell you a whole lot. However, DMs often do one of two things. They're either like, well, you talk to that squirrel over there and it tells you everything. It tells you, the villain, it tells you what their motive was, blah, 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 right? Just way too much for a squirrel to possibly know. Or they say, well, it's a squirrel, doesn't know anything. Bye, done. Neither of those are fulfilling for an investigation, right? In an investigation, now let's just make this really clear, right? You are successful in an investigation if you give your players a moment where they go, aha, the eureka moment, right? I see what's going on. No one told me. They gave me some puzzle pieces. I put them together. I am the one who's figured this out, right? That's when you were successful. That's what we need to create in these adventures. So, taking a look at these real quick, speak with plants, right? All I did for this is take plants and kind of split them up into 3 different categories. We have kind of our grasses, clovers, our small connective plants, plants that probably don't know a lot, but also have kind of this like branching hive mind, maybe. So, if someone walked through an area and stepped on some grasses and you cast the spell, maybe you can convince the grasses to compress so that you can actually see the footprints that were left. And maybe that doesn't tell you everything, but it might tell you where someone's going, or, oh, that looks like a dragon. I don't know, all sorts of things, right? They might be able to find where they are compressed currently. So if something was left behind, grasses could kind of point those out. But you're not going to get a whole lot from talking to grass about, what this person was thinking as they went through, right? We want to be specific so that when I cast this spell and a detective looks at grass, that's what they can get out of it. That's very powerful. Meanwhile, if you talk to shrubs and bushes, you might get a bigger sense of like what brushed by, what damaged their leaves as they were walking past. Maybe they can even get a sense of like their aura, their emotional energy as they walk through and walk past and push their bushes. Maybe they understand they pushed it angrily, and so they were like, I got pushed really hard. Or it was someone trying to be careful as they moved through, right? Finally, trees. Trees, canopy trees. When I think about forests, I think about these old growth forests. I think about like mother logs, these trees that have fallen, crashed onto the ground. And as they decay, they help give new life to mushrooms, to other plants. And so I was thinking about these canopy trees as being these nurturers of the forest. So they are a little bit more watchful. They can see what happens underneath their leaves. They're protective. Maybe they are aware of things that die. Maybe they are aware of fire and danger. So they can be more watchful for that. And of the 3, trees are probably the one, they last longer, so they have a longer memory. They might think about things in terms of decades, and they might not know if something happened 27 years ago, or if it was just about 30, right? They might not get those details right, but they might have a longer memory about things like this. Whereas grasses and connective plants, very short-termed creatures or plants, so they're not going to live very long. They're not going to remember things for very long. So understanding time in terms of days, and maybe at that point they have grown out and created new shoots, and their memories just moved on. An interesting way to think about how this spell can enhance your game by giving players these greater expectations. And I've got the same deal here with animals. Animals, a little bit broader, a little bit more specific intelligence, a little bit greater intelligence for the most part. And yet, animals are very different. You're going to get different stories if you're talking to prey versus predators when you are searching the streets for some kind of predator, right? Some kind of sort of dangerous creature. So potentially, right, a small prey animal like a mouse or a squirrel is just going to get the heck out of Dodge. They're just done. So they might know, yes, something happened here. It was over there, and then I ran that way. The end. They might be able to describe these levels of threat. How scared were they? They might know the scene, they might know the moment, but they don't have a long-term memory for that sort of thing. They're kind of moving back and forth, right? Squirrels bury their nuts and then don't remember where they were, right? There's a short-term memory to a lot of these creatures. So if you're trying to figure out who walked through here 3 weeks ago, probably don't ask a mouse. But yesterday or earlier today, they're going to tell you where that threat was because they ran away from it very, very quickly. Large prey animals, just to skip down, are a little bit different because they are a little bit more protective. They have that herd mentality. They have this intrinsic knowledge of migration patterns and where they want to move through. And so they are very careful for that. They have a much longer memory for these threats that could disrupt the patterns of their lives. So they might think more in seasonal cycles. They might have a longer term, yes, we had to move our entire path of migration, or we saw that on our way through. We saw that recently. We're going to change it in the future. They might be more careful of where camps and campsites, caravans, because they want to avoid those human populations with every movement. So that might be a way to figure those things out. Predators, on the other hand, are mindful of like territory violations. They want to know, oh, you walked through my territory, I'm going to fight you. Nope, I'm a cat. Never mind. I'm out of here. But they are looking for these sorts of things. So they might not care so much about characters who were like sneaking through the area and not posing any sort of threat to their dominance in the region. which is kind of a funny way to deal with it. Although cats, if someone's sneaking, a cat is sneaking, so maybe they are learning quite a bit. They could hold a grudge for a very long time, but might have short memories otherwise. Large predators might not want to help you, because they don't have to. Speak with animals does not make them helpful characters. Maybe they're not going to help you until you actually show yourself to be superior to them in some way. So pretty unsympathetic for the most part, unthreatened by humanoids unless they see battle or something like that. Long memories, mostly self-focused, but they are watchful for any threats to their supremacy in the domain. Probably not spending a lot of time focused on what is my prey thinking or something like that. What is that undangerous thing over there thinking? But if there's a wyvern in the area, yeah, they're going to know about it. I also took a little differentiation between aquatic animals and avian animals. Think about this. If you're talking to fish or something, right? Fish don't know what's going on the surface, but they do live in the shadows of those boats sailing around. So maybe they do notice that. Fish are also, right, schools of fish. They have a strong community knowledge, so you might actually learn things at a much longer distance than you expect because of that. Similarly, avian creatures, right, anything in the air, they're looking like they see so much that it's not about what they've seen, it's about what caught their attention and what remains in their memory. So things like bright objects, sudden movements, vivid colors. Is there a fire? They're probably going to remember a fire. Are they going to remember like a big bright circus wagon moving through? Maybe, absolutely, right? Wizard spells, sure, they might know those things. But a bunch of people walking past, why would they care? Why would they notice that? And why would it remain in their memories? So all of these are just different ways that you can use these spells in your campaign to really, because plants and animals are everywhere. They should be able to see all sorts of things, and they should be able to give your characters a way to envision their world and get more information by using these spells. Wasting these spells is bad because they are good ways to learn information, right? Oh gosh, this is the extra knowledge that you want these characters to get, right? Your druid investigator, yeah, they should be diving into this stuff, and they should learn so much from these, and you want to embrace that rather than just throw it away because plants are stupid. Last up, I also talked about Speak with Dead. This is an interesting spell. Speak with Dead gets a lot of use, and in an investigation campaign, you might expect it gets even more. Because the dead kind of know some things, right? In D&D, if there was a murder, you could just talk to the victim and see what's up. Seems easy. Should it be easy? Different story. With the Speak with Dead spell, you get to ask 3 questions, and the dead do not have to tell the truth. First of all, so talking to someone who is an enemy, right? They could lie, they could ignore you, they could do all sorts of things. You can change that with zones of truth and other things, but for the most part, what I wanted to do is differentiate the dead and talk about how they have different stories to tell and different access to stories, because in D&D, the life of someone who has passed on continues to change. There's a lot going on. So, quick note also that an investigator who's talking to the dead should be, given that these characters do not have to answer you and they do not have to tell the truth, probably be courteous, because ghosts are still envious of the living. Someone who is recently deceased, right? So imagine that what happens in the D&D world is once you move on, you basically become a petitioner, right? You can almost imagine this long line where everyone is leading towards the gates where they will be separated and sent out to the plane of their deity. And then other things can happen there. Like once they get to that plane, they might become a stronger creature, right? A deity might look at someone who is very heroic in life and say, I would like you to be one of the protectors of our plane. I'm going to transform you into a planar form that is more fitting for that. And some of those stories show up if you look in like the Planescape games or something, or some things like that. There was the Ghost Walk campaign as well, a few things like that. So interesting, right? It's not just they're waiting around to talk to you. They've got stuff going on. Some of those might just go to those planes and live in their paradise that they were waiting for and just kind of hang out. Some might get put into a new purpose, right? So there's all sorts of things that could happen. But these recently deceased creatures are probably still waiting in line. They are trying to come to grips with a new reality that they weren't ready for. They might be trying to figure it out. They might be, stuck in bureaucracy and organization. Who knows what's going on? It's confusing. And these ghosts might actually struggle to put together the story of their own deaths because it happened and then all this other stuff happened, right? There's a lot going on. They probably have some strong emotions, but they might not have settled down with all the details of what occurred. So speaking with these, I would focus on like specific sense memories, like sense, odd sounds, emotions, things like that, rather than details about who or what or why. On the other hand, going into a crypt and talking to someone who has been deceased for a long time, they've come to terms. They're doing what they're doing at this point. They have spent the time to think about what happened, and they have their, I would say their memory has solidified, but potentially their emotions have faded a little bit over centuries or whatever else. So you might get more of those very specific details when you talk to, like a ghost in a dwarven tomb that you've discovered from centuries ago, but you might not get some of the like very active emotional states of that character. And if the character is fortunate and has been reborn in some sense, they might not want to talk to you because they're living a whole new life, or they're taking this other task, right? If you cast Speak with Dead and that person has been, recast as an astral deva, and they come, are they going to spend the time to talk to you? Are they fighting in the blood war against the forces of chaos or whatever else? They might just be too busy, and you might have to use like a contact other plane spell in order to get more information. So very interesting. Will they remember anything about their previous life, or have they been fighting in this new planar war for 100 years? And so they're like, I don't remember much about that. Consider these, and I definitely don't use I don't have information all the time, but these are ways to take Speak with Dead and, again, give players expectations so that when they cast these spells, they have an expectation about what they should learn in return. One of the worst feelings is when a player tries to investigate with one of these spells, and I'm guilty of this myself, and they don't have expectations for what to get. They're just like, I don't know, this person's dead, I cast Speak with Dead, and they get an answer like, you don't get the information that you wanted. That's not fulfilling, and it doesn't seem like something a good practiced investigator should do. It seems like what a player would do when they don't know what they should do next, and those are different things. So first, I wanted to take a look at that. First of all, as kind of a way to think about these spells in D&D and think about how they can enhance your campaign, and give your players kind of these cool bonuses, these cool ways to investigate, to be good detectives. That's what they want to be. That's why they picked these characters. I have a couple different options in here. Put it over here, I suppose. For characters, like subclasses for characters to choose if they want to be detectives. And some of them are about gaining information. One of my favorite ones is basically like a surveillance. It's this ranger diviner character who can do some serious scrying. And so they are basically like, I can scry short range and I can hear what's going on. And then as I see what's going on in that region, I find my enemies, I cast Hunter's Mark on them, and then I jump in, I get the team, I go. And what I want out of that is I want that character who has decided I want to know what's going on before I go into a scene to have those expectations, right? That's it. That's such a strange place for us to be in. Usually as a dungeon master, you want people to be surprised. You walk into the room and you're like, ooh, I don't know what's going to happen next. Having a character who knows what's in the room, we see as a problem. And so, when scouting rogues are going ahead, things like that, we're often like, how do I keep stuff secret so that they don't just know everything? Because heroes that know everything often can just walk in and trounce things. But they can come up with plans that overcome a whole lot. But that's kind of the fun of the game. And for characters who are investigating, that might be a major point in their favor, something that they really want to focus on. Other ways to help your characters succeed are focusing on what happens when they get stuck, right? That's helping them be good investigators. And that might, for you, require giving players outlets for learning more information, right? Not just, well, I'm at the scene of the crime, I looked around, I've got 3 things, I don't know how they relate, I don't know what to do now. Who do they talk to about that? Like, they can talk to each other if they're all stuck. What do they do? So I have a couple different ways to deal with that here. One of them in Empyrean Investigations, I'll swap over to this real quick, is a section in the I guess the dungeon master section, if you will. That's all about what to do when your players are in crisis mode. They're stuck. How do we do that? Do we just end the adventure, right? No one's ever stuck in a combat. You know you're going to fight, and then it's going to be like victory or success or failure, I suppose. But in investigation, it sucks to just be stuck, right? In puzzles, right, you want hints. And so I often, when I'm writing puzzles, will develop hints so that there are like, ooh, are you on step 1? Well, here's a hint that'll get you to step 2. Are you on step 7? Okay, here's a hint to get you to step 8. Even if the flavor or the context isn't leading you there, you want to make sure players are having fun. Getting stuck on a puzzle is not fun, and we're playing a game that's the opposite of playing a game. So just stick that in your brain. Like just stick with it. It's important. When your investigators are in crisis mode, when they are stuck, make sure they know who they can talk to learn more information. It's fun. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Sherlock Holmes had multiple groups that he worked with, multiple groups to learn information about cases. And that's Sherlock Holmes, the greatest detective there ever was. We look at Scooby-Doo. They're pretty self-contained. They don't often go and talk to, I guess they talk to the police, but they don't have a lot of other groups that they attach themselves to. But different investigators have different means. And so I came up with 3 different groups. These are all tied. Each of these have a place in the 3 cases that I wrote in Empyrean Investigations. We'll talk about those as we get there. But this is what you should do when players get stuck. And I'm going to say this multiple times. You should not just give your players the information that they want, right? We're not playing a game then. We're just telling a story together, which is fine. That is fun. But an investigation is, again, about that personal, I get it. You don't want players to lose their agency because they failed a skill check. You want to help them succeed at that check. It's kind of the same thing. That's okay. So take a look at these 3 different possibilities, these 3 different ways that you could give players successful folks to talk to in your game. You could have them talk to the lawful authorities. That seems like a pretty easy one, right? Sherlock works with Mycroft is a little close, but he's got his police folks around. Usually heroes are tied to some sort of guard, some town guard, some watch, some constables, whatever else. And, we're used to getting a mission from them, needing to report, oh, there's bad stuff. Oh my gosh. In a criminal campaign, like an investigation, that seems pretty easy. It doesn't have to be easy. If you have watched Jessica Jones, Jessica does not have a great relationship with the lawful authorities, so you don't have to do it. But imagine that when you go to these places, you talk to someone who also went to the crime scene, someone who is also interested in solving a crime and learning what's going on. And maybe they investigated with different skills. And if you can talk to them, they might tell you something that you missed, or they might give you the results of a skill check that you failed. Now, the downside to that, because there should be a downside, right? Going to any of these people should complicate your case a little bit. In this one, the heroes are known and recognized to be the folks who were investigating this case. If it is unsuccessful, that's on you, right? Suddenly you're in trouble. And no matter what, your names are now on the books. These legal authorities are going to have a record that you were here trying to solve this crime. And that might put them on their suspect list. It might do all sorts of things, right? So consider that when you go to the legal authorities. Make sure there are consequences, because that's how the law works. You're on the hook. That's pretty important. Which is why... First, if you're playing the case of the Wandering Monk, very early on you meet Constable Gallium, who is a member of the Shield Wall, which is kind of like the town guard of the City of Stone. And she may be able to give you this kind of information in specific ways. They are also investigating the case of the Wandering Monk. They're just not very good at it. So consider that as an outlet. But again, now you're on books with the government. You could instead go talk to the criminal underworld. This one's fun. Sherlock does this one a few times as well, because in a settlement of any kind, which is where you likely are for an investigation, there's going to be some elements of crime around. Someone is going to know quite a bit about what's happening in town, what's going on, and they might be able to help out your investigation. Unfortunately, probably for a cost. I don't know what it is. That's a good thing for you and your players to figure out. There's some sort of I don't know, maybe they just want money, maybe they want a favor in the future. You know, a team of powerful heroes is a perfect group of folks to have a favor like just locked in reserve for, because that's a lot of damage that you could send out to someone, right? So be very careful when you're making these deals. Some criminal case rights characters, they might hold on to their information until they can get the biggest favor that they can. These are fun. I love these. Different games have different methods for this. And we'll talk a little bit more about these later, but this is almost like the devil's bargain here, right? I get what I need. I wonder what I'm going to have to give up in order to do it. The case of the Charred Inn is the first case in here. And on that one, we have a character called the Pauper. And the Pauper tries to stay on the good side of the law, but can kind of point to the criminal underworld quite a bit. And you'll see a little bit that once you read that adventure. That's one of my favorite characters in the entire book. I love that character. I hope he treats you well. Last up, right? You don't need to talk to the law. You don't need to talk to the world of crime. You could talk to just people who love to talk. You could go and engage the rumor mill to see if they have heard anything about the situation that you're invested in. That's fantastic. There's always those folks around, right? I don't know, like you go to the scene of the crime and you look over and there's like people over at the fence and they're chatting about what's going on, right? Cop shows have those all the time, crime shows. You can go talk to those people. Why not? It is hearsay. It's probably not impartial, right? You do tend to remember the things and retell the things that kind of embed in your memory and you can kind of relate to. But that gossip is pretty good. It could give you details that can lead you in places that you may not have expected, which is fun. On the other hand, the downside to talking to the rumor mill is, of course, that you become part of the rumor mill. Now you are the investigators. You are going to save everyone, right? You are going to solve this problem and potentially consider the ramifications of you failing at that task or succeeding at that task in a way that the rumor mill doesn't actually like very much. There are, now you're famous, so enjoy fame, and fame is going to have some complications no matter what in town. The case of the Emerald Queen has a pair of folks on the Emerald Court, Aravis and Lenora. They would love to talk to all the heroes as they investigate the court themselves. Town favorites, favorites of all the people, wonderful and super, super, super huge gossips. So, those are kind of some of my ideas to help you out with the 3 pillars, right? Those are ways to give exploration a little bit of heft, because in D&D it needs it a little bit if it's going to stand up to the comprehensive nature of combat or the robustness of our own abilities to create role-playing scenarios, right? Social interactions of all kinds. We're pretty good at that, but how to explore is a little bit of a tougher deal. I said I wanted to talk about failure. I keep kind of hinting at it, and I do want to get to failure. Failure is tricky. I'm a teacher. I know failure is tricky. You don't want to let people fail. But the key is kind of that failure is how we learn in many ways. So failure is important. It pushes us to greater and greater success. And when we talk about failure, we need to be very careful. We don't want our players to fail and feel bad about it. We want our players to fail and know that there's still a way out, right? That's what a good teacher does. That's what a good classroom does. That's what a good puzzle does. And here we are in investigations, right? You as the dungeon master, that is your role. That is your job, is to allow your characters to fail, and the story must go forward, right? We don't end the story. If the players fail in a fight against the villain, right, the villain escapes, you're going to go catch that villain later, or there will be complications. The story gets better. How do you make an investigation work when characters are failing? Now, besides the other stuff I said about other resources, ways to make your world a little bit more robust, failure is important. Actually, failure is one of the ways that you reach success when we're talking about investigations. Let me quote some Sherlock at you. How often have I said to you that when you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth? We know that he did not come through the door, the window, or the chimney. We also know that he could not have been concealed in the room, as there is no concealment possible. Whence, then, did he come? And this is Sherlock is talking to Watson about this room that they're investigating, and Sherlock knows the answer. But in those stories, we are playing the role of Watson, right? It's our hapless narrator who doesn't know everything, and we need to be able to figure it out. So where Sherlock might have just looked around and understood, Watson needs this lesson. And basically, what Sherlock lays out is one of the perfect ways that detectives actually learn how to, what happened. They get, this is their pattern of finding success. It is by looking at all of the options and eliminating all of the possibilities until there's only one left, and then that has to be the truth. Right? It's not Occam's razor. It's definitely not, right? It's not the simplest option is the right one. It's the one that's left. It's the only other possibility, no matter how ridiculous it might be. And in this story, I believe that Watson then notices that there is a way to come in through the roof. And so that must have been it. I can't remember off the top of my head. Detectives learn by failing. Let's talk about this, because this is keying in on some logic real quick. There's a couple different types of logic, and this is one of them. This is the difference between direct and indirect proof. And all of you, I am certain, know a little bit about proof from your high school geometry class. And we do a very difficult job in trying to introduce logic, and so a lot of people hate proofs, and it's fine. If you're there, salute, you're okay. The world goes on. Proof is difficult. Direct proof is very, very difficult, and that's the kind that we teach you in schools. Direct proof is like a law show. Like, I want to say Perry Mason, but that's centuries old at this point. But there is an idea when you're making a legal case that you want to make a direct argument, right? Direct is very, very clear. Direct is this point. If this is true, then this is true. And if this is true, then this is true. And if this is true, then you're going to jail. That is the boom, 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 boom. Direct is very clear. It is the kind of way that a prosecutor wants to envision everything, right? It is all about eliminating doubts, and through this very, very clear path. You were there. This thing happened while you were there. All these other, no one else was, it had to be you. That kind of thing. We do that in geometry a whole lot. Like, oh, so it's a rectangle. This is a property of a rectangle. Therefore, it's a square. I don't know. So when we're talking about direct, we have this what's the good word for it? It's kind of a mastery. Direct is a mastery approach. Even when mathematicians at a higher level are trying out direct proofs, they must already know everything about the situation. A direct proof is, I know the answer, I just need to explain the answer. Your essay is a direct proof, right? Every essay you wrote in high school is direct because you knew what the answer was. You just needed to support your thesis all the way down. Very few people write an essay in an indirect way. However, every single crime show, like crime procedural sort of thing, works in an indirect fashion. And I want to talk about Castle, which I think is my favorite example of this. It's the one I always use. In Castle, a crime has happened, and Rick Castle must go solve the whole thing. And always knows how to do it, which is wild, right? Comes up with a list of suspects from the scene and goes to suspect A. Figures out they didn't do it. All right, cross that one out. Got to go to suspect B, who is usually the guest star. Everyone at home is like, well, there's a guest star. I wonder, that's probably the villain, right? But I'm not sure. Sometimes they throw a little twist and it's not the villain. Then they go to person, and so person B, your guest star, it's not them. You figure out that it's not them. You go to person C. Nope, it's not them. But by the time you get to person D, they're the only person left. And so you're like, all right, everyone goes in. We're going to arrest this person. And they're like, I don't know, doing something ridiculous. So obviously it wasn't them, which makes everyone go, wait, but there's no other options. And then Rick Castle is like, nope, one of those folks must have lied. And here's the one that did it. And so you go back and it's either the guest star or it's person, probably C. I think A is usually good. They're usually the friend of the victim who helps you out a whole lot. Sometimes that person did it too, but there's a mix-up about whether it's going to be A, B, or C at that point. Which one lied? Which one was most suspicious, right? This is an example of indirect proof. You are eliminating all the options and trying to figure out which one must be left. You're not going through and you're saying, well, you are my only suspect, and I'm going to prove that you did it. It's this very broad approach, which is more interesting for every one of these shows because you want a wide cast of characters and you want to see people doing funny things, right? You get little bits. This character came in for a little while, did something funny and wacky, made everybody laugh at home, and then they're out of the story. Indirect, very, very, very powerful. Now, as D&D players, every adventure you have ever played is direct. Is that true? It's probably true. because right in a direct you're like, well, I need to go find this object. Well, I heard that this object was in this one place, so I'm going to go to that place. I'm going to open the front door. Cool. Now I'm in this living room, and we just boom, 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 boom. It's a very linear pathway through your adventure. And those are fine. I'm not saying those are bad at all. They are very traditional ways to do adventures. Linear storytelling is very powerful. Even a sandbox style adventure is usually direct in its approach, right? You're going to a couple different places to find a thing. As soon as you find that thing, you're off and running. The question is not like, which one of these places is best? I need to go to all of them to figure it out, right? It's not usually, although it could be. I go visit all these places. I find these 3 statues. One of them is the actual statue. Now I have all 3 of them. Now I'm going to figure out which one it is. Just because that's a lot of work to go to 2 places that has the wrong thing, which we typically don't do. Investigation adventures can be indirect. They don't have to be. Sherlock is absolutely an indirect storyteller. Dan Brown novels, those are investigations, and they are 100% straightforward, running at the answer. Those are as direct as they get. It doesn't mean direct is not fun. It isn't a page turner or anything, but it's not about canceling out all the possibilities, whereas an investigation that is indirect really, really is. So when we're talking about indirect, failure is important because failure limits options and it gets us closer to the actual answer, the one that is remaining. That's important. What I want to do real quick is I want to jump to the Dungeon Master's Guide, because this is full of rules that I don't typically look at all the time because, the Player's Handbook outlines D&D pretty well. I don't usually need to search for an extra rule to help out, but there are a few rules in here that are very, very good and can help your campaign a lot. Out here in kind of the extra section, there's a DM's vault or sort of thing back here that has all sorts of ways to make your campaign a little bit more interesting. And one of them is on page 242, and it's about resolution and consequences. There are 2 rules in here I care about and one that I do not at all. I'll tell you that. As a mathematician, critical success or failure drives me up the wall. Critical failures, 5% chance that you break your sword or break a lockpick or whatever else you're doing is not very fun for anyone. These other 2 are great. I talked about devil's bargains earlier, and one of the rules on here is called success at a cost, and I absolutely think you should use this rule. Failure can be tough, but the agony is compounded when a character fails by the barest margin. When a character fails a roll by only 1 or 2, you can allow the character to succeed at the cost of a complication or hindrance. Ooh, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Now, okay. I want to take a look at this, and I want to think about this in 2 different ways, because this gets close to a rule from Blades in the Dark as well, which is actually called the Devil's Bargain. It is a known fact that you have failed, right? In Blades in the Dark, you have failed. And you're like, but I want to be successful. So what if I offer this complication to the story, this hindrance to myself, this penalty? And if you, the DM, accepts this penalty, well, then there we go. I will just act as if I succeeded, and we'll move on. This is very, very similar. And you can run it either way you want to. It is not clear how you could have to do this. So imagine these. As a DM, you could be, well, you're off by 2. I will let you hit, player, if you allow me to instantly counterattack with like a bite or a claw attack or something like that. Or I will allow you to succeed at that saving throw if you fall prone, or if you are deafened for a round or something like that, like a fireball, just boom. It was just a little too much. I will allow you to make the rest of the climb check that you were allowed to make, get up to the very top, but in the process of scrambling to catch yourself, the rope falls and someone else is going to have to throw it back up or something like that, right? The one in here that I love the most is a character fails to intimidate a kobold prisoner, but the kobold reveals its secrets anyway, while shrieking at the top of its lungs and alerting everyone else in the dungeon. I just think it's tons of fun, right? So that's 10, right? So succeeding or failing by 1 or 2, that's a 10% chance. That happens a lot. And so consider these, just because it is a fun way to allow your characters to fail, to be successful, but with these penalties, which is a lot of fun. There's also degrees of failure. This is a rule that I remember using in 3rd ed and 4th ed, but I haven't seen it so much here, which is about retries, right? It's not super interesting if you were trying to pick a lock and you fail, and then you just pick it again and then succeed, right? Why don't I just let you succeed? Why don't you just open every door? I think it was in the Baldur's Gate games, they had these as well. When you tried to pick a lock, there was a level, and if you failed by only a little bit, okay, good, tension ramps up a little bit, but you can try again. If you fail by too much of a degree, like by 5 or more usually, then you cannot retry it. That's a very typical way to run kind of this success, or what is it? Success, when success is tense or stressful, right? Earlier games had taking 10 or taking 20. Taking 10 was something that you could do if you weren't stressed, I believe. If taking 20 you could do if there was no penalty for failure at all. It just took 20 times as long. So if it took 1 round or 1 minute to unlock a lock, then taking 20 would allow you to act as if you had rolled a 20, but it takes 20 minutes or 20 rounds or something. That's a rule in Pathfinder 1. And it gets used a lot because it does fix those ideas of, I'm a rogue, I should be able to open this, no one's stopping me, right? The tension is when there's a time limit, when I can't take 20, or when there's monsters around, or when the room is filling with gas. Now I can't take 20. Now I need to actually start rolling those dice. Taking 10 is a little bit less interesting because it just gives you an average roll, right? So it's just 10 plus your bonuses. Which is how we still do things like passive perception, right? That is based on that taking 10 rule. As I'm just walking around, I'm usually taking 10, which is something that takes just no effort. I'm just not being bad at looking around, I guess, or however else you want to describe that. So consider those. I think success at a cost is a lot of fun and can make your campaign really interesting, especially when it comes to dealing with these other groups that I was talking about earlier. Consider, like, what if we head back to our investigators in crisis here real quick, and we take a look at these groups. What if I will allow you to succeed at this check? However, when the legal authorities come by later, they're going to see that you broke this thing or you did this thing, which is a crime in itself. And it may not put you in their favor, even though you have solved a problem that they desperately needed solved. Or what if I will let you succeed, however, you're helping out this criminal organization right now, and you were going to leave behind evidence that will directly go back to that organization and show the authorities that they were there, that they were helping out this whole thing. So those are fun. Those are really, really interesting. There are ways to kind of make your game a little bit more interesting, and again, kind of boost your world, which is what we always want to do, especially with an investigation. They're fun when they get messy, right? What is a good the Italian Job. I love The Italian Job because they're driving those Mini Coopers around, right? It's a heist movie, so it's not quite here, but the complications that occur in that movie make it more interesting over time. An investigation is not dissimilar to a heist, right? It's not an action, although there's plenty of action in that, but it is about the complications making the investigation a little bit more interesting. All right. Good. So those are kind of 2 major things. Focus on the 3 pillars: how to boost exploration, how to help your characters fail and fail well. Now we really got to talk about how your style as a DM really kind of needs to change in an investigation. There are lots of DMing styles. Lots of them are good. Some of them are bad. As the DM of an investigation, you have to be careful because you are now in a very specific position. And I want to tell you how it works when you are someone who writes a puzzle. I I have been in the position of watching a group of people solve a puzzle that I wrote, and they looked up at me and said they needed a hint. I have a couple choices there. Number one, I could just tell them the answer. I mean, I know it. They all know that I know it. They all know that I'm standing right next to them, knowing the answer. But that wouldn't be helpful. It wouldn't be fun to just be given the answer. You want to solve this problem yourself, right? You want a hint that will guide you, that will push you, that will nudge you, but won't nudge you too far. If I ruin an aha moment for you, the puzzle's much less fun. I want you to have this series of fun, like, ooh, oh, I get it, I know, right? You want that. That builds the story. That's an investigation. You as a DM need to do kind of the same thing here. For example, let's do this. As a DM, when we're running a combat scene and someone has to make a climb check to get up to the cliff where the monster is, and the first person fails, oh gosh, and they're like casting fire, you boom, boom, boom. And the second person tries to climb and then fails. Well, when the third person tries, we are like, oh, this is not how I was expecting this to go. We kind of start to softball it. We start to let people succeed a little bit more often. For the narrative of that scene that we have created, that's probably good. I'm just going to throw that out there. Don't say I'm saying don't do that. But when it gets to things like investigations, we also have this tendency to softball things, right? In a combat scene, I know someone's going to make it, or something will change so that they get up to the top. They can sort it out. But imagine that someone is trying to make an Arcana check to learn about a spell that was just cast, and if they fail that check, well, now they just missed out on some information that I wrote. I thought it was cool, so I put it in there, and maybe it's important for my campaign. There's a couple clues in our adventure that I had to make sure, or in the Empyrean Investigations, that if you miss that clue, you got to get it somewhere else because those clues are important. So if someone fails, right? What if they're identifying a magic item that is important for this adventure, and they fail? I don't know. You have them make an Arcana check and they fail it. Do you force them to cast the identify spell and they'd have to attune to it, or do you just let it go today just because it's kind of cool and you softball it? We want to help our players succeed. We want to get this information out that they're asking for and they're trying to get. But if we just softball everything, again, we're not really playing a game together. We're just telling a story together. That's also fun. D&D's got a little bit of gamesmanship to it. So what I might do here in an investigation is I would hold back. I would hold back just a little bit. If you are the one telling everything, then those players don't get aha moments, which is what we kind of want out of an investigation, out of a detective story, right? We want to solve these things. We want to sort them out. We want to bust through it. We don't want it to be too easy for them because then they're not investigating. We don't want it to be too hard because then they're stuck and they don't know what to do, and that's not fun. So you have a very careful path to tread here. And just imagine, right? What would combat be like if every roll was a success? I mean, it'd be over. It'd be quick. But if we want our investigations to feel like combats, in a sense, to have that kind of robustness, we have to allow for the times when players fail to hit, don't do any damage, and things get a little bit more tense, right? Investigations don't have that if we're just softballing everything. They also don't have that if players are just failing and they don't have any way to succeed from there. So you need to reward good plays, good rolls, good ideas. You want success to be earned. That's what a puzzle is all about. It's just, aha, I got it. I broke through. I've got this. I can move on to the next stage. And there's a couple different ways to do that. And I want to point out one of them that is in, this book that I wrote that I like a whole lot. It is a very, very specific minor rule. Here on page 24. Let's go to here. I've made notes about some new rules for detectives. The rule for evidence is really, really important. I wasn't able to recreate it here because that's an officially created product. Excuse me. It's in the third ed book, I believe, Masters of the Wild. There's a rule for evidence, which is really, really good, and I urge you to check it out. It kind of details how characters who want to stay on the, who are working for the town guard should be careful to bring evidence back. And that is a thing that I have written into Empyrean Investigations, is this need to have evidence, to understand evidence. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end when I talk about running these adventures in particular. But consider enforcing a fine if all your players do is go out and commit crimes and don't bring back anything except their own narrative, right? If all your players can do is come back and say, oh, well, I had to kill everyone in that room because they were doing a bad thing and I used my own judgment on that. Like that's bad. That's not good. Consider like, here's evidence. Here's the ritual that they were doing. Here's, here are the people that they hurt. Here's all the stuff. I have witnesses. I have all these things, right? I'm not saying they need to bring a posse of witnesses around with them everywhere they go, but just consider that search for evidence as an important part of their game. I don't know, enforce fines, do all sorts of things, like, give them rewards if they bring criminals back alive so that they are more interested in doing that and staying kind of on the good side of, I don't know, alignments, goodness, whatever we want to do. There is this very specific urge in role-playing games, in D&D in particular, to just go out and like attack, destroy. And investigation requires a little bit more subtlety and a little bit more nuance, let's say. So get that evidence, make sure it's in the game, find that villain's diary or whatever it takes. But the one I want to talk about here is this inspiration rule, which I think is very important. Players get stuck sometimes, and if you are holding back, then you are putting them in the position where they just get stuck. They go talk to all the people. Maybe they're just not putting it together. They can't see the thing that you want them to see. So consider this. Consider an alternative use for inspiration. They've done something, that you as a DM thought was cool. You gave them inspiration. They spend it to just ask you a direct question. That's it. It could be like, what should we be doing now? It might be very specific. Where do I go to? I don't understand this clue. Who should I talk to about this? And don't mess with them. Just answer the question. Like, be very, very clear. What they've done is they have taken a resource that you handed out to reward good play, and they are trying to play well, right? This is a thing about the game. Like, it's rare, it's useful. They could do this to make sure an attack succeeds, or, a skill check is perfect. They could look awesome with it, whatever else. And instead they're using it to say, I don't understand this, and I want you to help me, find out what's going on. Don't be cryptic. Don't be confusing when you as a DM are trying to help with this rule, right? Answer the question. It doesn't mean you need to give it doesn't say, tell me the answer, like tell me the entire case. And specifically, don't allow your players to ask questions that are like, give me all the answers to this case. That doesn't make any sense. This is meant for when they are stuck and they just need the nudge, and you give them that nudge. Be specific, be helpful. And you can still build it into the narrative, even though it's a direct communication from player to DM. They open the journal and they see a page they hadn't seen before, or they look on the ground, or maybe in their pocket, someone has dropped a note into their pocket which says, go here, do this. That stuff is totally fine. But this is a very simple way. It's a very specific resource that is meant for good things. Let this be one of the good things that it can be in an investigation. Especially since an investigation may not have as much combat, so inspiration is not quite as useful. Do this. It's a fantastic rule. I find it very, very, very helpful. I got a couple more things I want to talk about here with DM stuff. One of them is actually in the Dungeon Master's Guide as well, which is, there we go. Downtime. Downtime exists in the Dungeon Master's Guide as a set of things that you can do outside of an adventure or in between adventures or whatever else. It usually takes money, it takes time, it takes effort. And you can do all sorts of things. And then don't look at the Dungeon Master's Guide. Go immediately to Xanathar's Guide, which has an updated version of these downtime rules. But also check out Acquisitions Incorporated, because the rules for creating an adventuring franchise in here definitely involves a lot of downtime. It's pretty perfected in here. One of them is on page 43, which I just want to check in on real quick. Page 43 talks about scrutineering. Scrutineering is trying to do some intelligence gathering in between adventures. In this one, you can have your people go do it or all sorts of things. But basically what it says is you do something outside of an adventure to gain information that you require for your mission. And so you go out, you make a check. There's usually a downtime check for this sort of thing. You make an intelligence check. You might get some bonuses depending. You might spend money to increase your bonus as well. And based on your level of success, you can either get no effect or you can gain a couple pieces of lore. These might be, specific details about an NPC or all sorts of things. This is fantastic. There's also complications because whenever you do this, your agent, you might have been spotted or seen or all sorts of things. Maybe one of the pieces of information is false and was planted by a rival. Ooh, very good. What else do we got here? The target of the information becomes aware of your scrutineering efforts and they resent you. That's fantastic. Or a source of information decides to double cross you, join the other organization, become an asset against you. So these are just interesting ways to develop your story a little bit more and kind of succeed at things that you might not succeed at otherwise. And these are like not difficult things to do. These checks are not high, right? It's like a 6 or a 7 to get a piece of lore. It just kind of requires this other effort outside of an adventure, the concept that it takes a little bit of time to do. So I love, excuse me, I love all these rules in here. And I tried to add some myself with Empyrean Investigations. So on page 6 is the College of Consultation, a bard archetype. Excuse me. With this archetype, what I wanted to do is basically create a Mycroft-like character. Mycroft in the Sherlock stories or TV show or whatever else is a government figure who doesn't dirty his hands, basically. You don't see Mycroft out in the field. He's really taking care to send other people to gather information, to do this stuff, right? Mycroft runs a franchise of Acquisitions Incorporated for sure. And so here what I have come up with is basically the Starlight Symposium, which is the resource that these bards get to use to succeed at checks. So beginning at 3rd level, when you get membership into this organization, you can basically send payments and a coded message out. They will pick it up. They will go do a thing and then report back, usually within a day. So these early ones, if you are out on an adventure where it's very time sensitive, this may not be super helpful, but yeah, why can't I just pay 5 gold and have my covert mercenaries go succeed at a DC 13 check? Not higher than that, but like a DC 13. That's pretty reasonable. I could do that. That's like taking 10. That's like taking 8 or so for one of the skills that you're really good at 1st level, right? So I could probably hire someone to go do that on their own. Just get, go sort this thing out. I could pay quite a bit more. I could pay 10 times that much if I wanted to get a DC 17. These are checks for persuading someone, learning information by talking to someone. So, imagine these for diplomacy or persuasion, sorts of things. Intimidation, maybe. You could have someone run out of town. You could do things like follow a target for a day. There's some other things in here that you just have your people do. Search a neighborhood for a target, provided they're not magically protected. These are ways that you as a character can gain information from your organization and use it for good purposes. 100 gold, scouting a building for traps and secret doors and things like that. Pretty interesting stuff. I also love this for intelligence gathering, right? And by that, I mean, going to a library and learning some stuff. Players don't want to do that very much. So what if you just hired someone to go read a book for you? Sounds great. They'll be back tomorrow with information. So that's one of the things I put in here. Absolutely. At 14th level, you join the council itself. And I love this ability. At 6th level, you actually can hire one of these operatives to go with you as kind of a sidekick. At 14th level, you become a member of the council, and once per session, you can ask the symposium to do something meaningful, take action, and make a change to the campaign world, which I thought was a fun idea to kind of give players some agency in your campaign world. I don't know that they should be toppling kings with this or, governments. But absolutely, if you're on a mission and you're like, well, this would be a whole lot easier if that corrupt politician was exposed for A, B, or C. So you just ask the council and you make it happen. I've got some ideas for the council here, some quests that you could go on for the symposium and things like that. It's just a fun idea that I wanted to have that Mycroft feel to it, kind of managing, what exists in the rules as downtime in a slightly different way. All right. So last up, as a DM, I want to talk about DMing specifically the adventures in Empyrean Investigations. I want to do this quickly because I know we're at about an hour, and that's plenty of time to listen to me talk about stuff. But in this book, over here, the adventures are written in a very specific way. They are kind of sandboxes with linear components because that's how I feel an investigation needs to be. Players need to have some agency as they search around, but once they find the target, there they go. The Case of the Charred Inn is absolutely like that. Once you have solved the puzzle and you find out where the villain's lair is, it's definitely kind of a dungeon crawl from there. Not a long one because the investigation is story enough, but it is certainly a few rooms, a few secrets, a few treasures, things like that. That's the same with the Case of the Wandering Monk, right? Once you discover where the villain is, pretty straightforward from there. It just kind of has to be that way, which is totally fine. So play with that sandbox, like just let it go, like do all sorts of stuff. I would absolutely, while playing these, if characters miss some of these clues, give them to them in different ways. Have the authorities show up with information. They want to question you, but they give stuff away while they're there. Have criminals willing to sell you information if you just can't figure out what's going on, or gossips who just want to hear something about far away, and are willing to tell you the weird thing that they saw. Right? Your goal is to help them solve the puzzles, the clues, the weird ideas in here, and they might get stuck and they might come up with weird. I had to write an entire section. Because the first time I ran one of these, the first adventure, it's the Case of the Charred Inn starts with like a funeral march, and I had the funeral as like this very small thing over here, and the characters are like, well, I want to go investigate that funeral, and while I'm there, I want to go talk to, these victims and all these other people. And I had some of that written, but I didn't have the funeral part, and so that became a bigger part of the story, and you'll see that is now in here. You can do a little bit more with that. Some players don't care about that and don't want to go to that funeral. They've got some clues, they've got some things to bite into, and they're often running in that direction. Let them run, absolutely, right? The players can do anything. Hold on to your rewards for some of the specific things that they do, right? The investigation is a little bit too easy if any choice they make is rewarded with a clue or a hint or something that pushes them. Go ahead and let them, follow someone, and then when they follow that person who seemed angry for a while, they don't know anything. They're just people. They might be angry for an important reason. I have a character like that in the Charred Inn, I believe. But yeah, come up with those things like let your characters run, give them so many avenues to explore that it helps them with their indirect problem solving, right? They've eliminated that option. Let's let that go. And don't mess around with them on it. Don't string them along for too long. Because they'll consider that as an option and keep fighting and keep pushing towards it. The last thing I want to do is just really quickly talk about the evidence checks at the end of each of these cases, because they are weird and they are very gamey. And I got them from Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, one of the greatest games that there is. Basically, when you play that game, at the very end, you are given a list of questions and you need to answer them. And I have basically done a very similar thing here. The heroes may learn the answer to the questions, and if they do, they gain a point. The heroes may have evidence related to the question, which gets them an additional point, and they may have mastered the evidence with a skill check or a specific conversation, which gives them a third point. Each one of these, some of them are just totally almost red herrings, right? Characters might miss them completely. They might not. They may dig into that and get really excited about that too. So in each of these, you basically allow them to not present the evidence. That's never, imagine at the end of any one of these adventures, if someone just said, well, what did you learn? Well, you just played the whole thing. So, and you as the DM know everything. So if they just tell you what happened, is that satisfying? What if instead you had an NPC ask them specific questions that they needed to know the answers to? That's a little bit more interesting. And that's how I would run the end of these is do this final scene where you're not saying what happened, but that character, that queen, that council member, that whoever it is like, answer me this, party. Why were each of the buildings targeted for arson? And either the players know the answer and have some evidence, or maybe they don't. Maybe they know a lot more about some of the other things. Depending on how many points they get, that can change the reward that they get for these stories, which is kind of a fun way to, again, push characters in certain directions. You know, if you run an investigation, if you run the first one of these and the players are not very interested in, you know, gathering evidence and doing things like, and you want, you know, is that the campaign you want to tell? Like, maybe you want the NPCs to push characters a little bit more in that direction, kind of help them out. You know, give them that sort of feedback that you want. It's just a kind of fun, you know, you can kind of influence your campaign and make it what you want with that. If your players don't want to do that, you don't have to, you know, give them the best reward for the best outcome, give them the reward that fits how they played or how well you think they did or how well they think they did. You know, ask them, you know, do they think they solved this case fully, or are there still things that mystify them about what happened? Plenty of ways to do it, and plenty of ways to really make an investigation come alive. I hope this has been a really helpful kind of look at these different options, these different ways to think about investigations in a game, different ways to build up players' expectations, huge, and allow them to use their abilities in ways that really support their adventuring here in Empyrean Investigations and in whatever investigations you come up with on your own. It's a ton of fun to write, ton of fun to design, and it's just a different way of telling stories that I love. D&D can do these things. We just got to help it out a little bit. We just got to boost it up. But I hope you have a ton of fun with this book, with telling these stories. I hope your players enjoy them. And thank you so much for supporting this project, for being here, for listening. If you are just watching this on YouTube, thank you for watching this whole time. And again, my name is Richard. You can find me on social stuff at rmolina, or follow this channel right here. I don't know, there's a thing somewhere. Yeah, get out there. The game is absolutely afoot. Bye.